Excellent. Looks like everybody's connected to the audio. So I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Dawn Philippi, and I am a member of the planning committee for this ACLIA conference. And I wanted to introduce you to the session that we're going into right now, which is the Delta model. I want to thank our sponsor for this session, which is Herb Rubenstein Law. And Herb, I pass it to you to let everybody know what this is about.
Thank you very much. Welcome to the plenary session, the Delta model, a framework for supporting and guiding attorneys in this time in the face of change and uncertainty. Allison Carroll has developed a systematic approach. She's a professor at Northwestern University Pritzker School of Law. No one can deny that in the last year, we have had unprecedented change. And as the author of the book, Leadership for Lawyers, I saw 20 years ago, the legal profession was going through change that it simply wasn't ready for. Lawyers had not been trained in leadership. It wasn't part of the law school curriculum, and I understand that. It doesn't help you pass the bar exam at the first level. In addition, lawyers showed again, and the legal profession showed again in COVID. We were not ready for that. Food stores didn't close, hospitals didn't close, but the courts closed. And so lawyers now are at the point where our change will be dramatic. Professor Carroll's system, the Delta model, is a systems thinking approach. And she has a way to look at the competencies needed by the lawyers. And so many lawyers have so many different jobs. The competencies are different for each lawyer. So her model is both dynamic in terms of fitting to the right lawyer in the right position, and also in showing which competencies the lawyer needs. So I'd now like to turn this over to Allison Carroll, and thank you very much for the work you do at the Pritzker School. Please stay muted during the session. The session is being recorded. You will have access to it through the scheduling part. If you have any technical difficulties, send a note in the chat box. Questions can be raised at any time. They'll be addressed at the end of this session. Professor Carroll is the co-director of the school's nationally ranked Center on Negotiation and Mediation. She was also appointed the law school's first assistant dean of law and technology. As a person whose law firm in 1984 in Washington, D.C. was maybe the first law firm where every lawyer, every law clerk, every intern, every secretary had a computer on his or her desk. It is a daunting task to see someone who's the assistant dean of law and technology, because the ship is going to be increasing quite dramatically in the future. Let us welcome Professor Carroll.
Thank you so much, Herb. I love it. And your foresight into the field with giving everybody in your firm the technology that they needed before most, and your book, Leadership in Law, relates to this work of the Delta model directly. So I just want to say thank you for your work. And let me thank ACLIA and the Association for Continuing Legal Education for having me. I am so excited to talk with you all about the Delta model. This has been a passion project of mine for the past 3 years. And it's increasingly, or I'm becoming increasingly convinced that it may provide the framework we need to support our field and our profession, really navigate the change and uncertainty that is that we face. So I want to tell you a little bit about the Delta model, tell you how I think it can guide us through these moments. I'll share a little bit about how some organizations are using it, and then open it up for questions. But in addition to questions, I'm also looking for your feedback. So how you could imagine using this model in the work that you do, and maybe a little bit of a reality test, because I know I'm biased about this model. I know I've been putting a lot of time into it, so I've got that bias going. But as I said, with each turn and each situation where I reassess the model, I am finding that it still fits the time, it meets the need. And so I need your little check on that. So let me start by telling you a little bit about the Delta model. The Delta model is a very simple visual framework. It captures a holistic understanding of the law through this simple visualization of a triangle. The triangle has three sides, of course, and each side represents a broad competency area that we think represents the necessary skills attorneys and legal professionals need in order to succeed in today's practice. The bottom, the base of the triangle, represents those traditional legal skills that we're all familiar with. The right side of the triangle relates to our ability to deliver our legal services efficiently and effectively, and tends to focus on the things like data analytics and technology. The left side of the triangle is all about the people, the who. It is understanding relating to our clients, of course, but also our colleagues and ourselves. So how is this going to help us in these moments of change and uncertainty? So I want to start by talking about pre-COVID, because it was before COVID even hit that our field was starting to grapple with some of the changes that were taking place that I think Herb was really highlighting, specifically around technology. So the nature of legal services was already changing. It was changing because our clients began to expect their services were faster, cheaper, better, and expecting that we start incorporating more technology in the work that we are doing. But then it led to a lot of questions. Well, as technology is coming into the profession, how is that going to shape the future of the law? So we have this increased importance being placed on technology, and we have this increased importance being placed on technology and data. So in 2018, Ed Walters publishes this book, Data Driven Law, that really helps highlight the increasing role data is playing in our decision making, whether it's because of our client's business and the data analytics that they're using to make decisions, or it's legal analytics. So the ability to look at historical information about behaviors and decision making to understand, and in some platforms, predict future decision making and behaviors on the part of judges or our colleagues. This change was captured by the American Bar Association. I don't need to know this, tell the CLE group about this, but I'll just highlight, of course, that in 2012, the ABA changes Comment 8 to say that not only as attorneys do we need to stay abreast of those changes in the law and practice, we also need to stay on top of the benefits and risks associated with the relevant technology. Today, 9 years later, 39 states have adopted Comment 8. We were supposed to be together in Minnesota, so I'll highlight that Minnesota adopted it. I'm down in Chicago. We adopted it in Illinois. That was a bias. Chicago, as if Chicago is Illinois, catching myself. So Illinois has adopted this. And so we know that the increasing importance being placed on technology is starting to become recognized and captured by the profession. But how can we understand those changes? In 2016, Amani Smathers coins this term, the T-shaped lawyer. It's really based on a historical model of understanding the I-shaped professional versus the T-shaped professional. So I'll just describe that real quick. So an I-shaped professional has a single mastery in an area of competency. So in the law, that's going to be our legal knowledge and skills. A T-shaped professional has that mastery, but also has an understanding and awareness of complementary areas. So Amani says in the law, we not only need to have that mastery in our traditional legal knowledge and skills, we also need to have an understanding and awareness of these related fields she identified as design thinking, data analytics, technology, project management, business tools. This model got a lot of traction, it still gets a lot of traction, because it does such a nice job of highlighting that it's no longer sufficient to just focus on our legal knowledge and skills. So as this change is happening, though, there is the fear that with this increased focus on technology and data, that we are going to allow the field to be taken over, or the profession to be taken over by robots and artificial intelligence. All right, so are robots going to take my job? All professions have had this fear. Richard Susskind helps us understand that it's not that AI and technology is taking over our profession. It is enhancing it and shifting what it is that we do. And so we have to understand what those roles are to make sure that our models of our profession and understanding our competencies better reflect that. So I started looking at some other fields to try to understand how other professions have adjusted to this shift. And there's a Harvard Business Review article about how professionals moved to becoming trainers of that technology, teaching the technology what it needs to know, maintainers, so keeping that technology up to date, but also assessing it and making sure that the bias that is most likely embedded in the system isn't impacting the output. And so retraining the systems. And then of course, explainers. So working with our clients to help them understand how this technology and the outputs, the computations that it is, information it's providing us, what that means. How do we apply it to the specific individual personal context that our clients might be facing? And it's in this role of explainers that honestly, a lot of technologists point out that as artificial intelligence is increasingly used, humans, in order to be effective in working side by side with that technology, have to increasingly focus on our emotional intelligence. That is how we're going to complement the technology and be effective in that role of explainer. So I teach through the Center on Negotiation and Mediation. I teach a lot of communication skills on how to work with others in the midst of disputes. So emotional intelligence has always been something that I've been committed to teaching our law students, but it's been interesting to hear technologists say how important it is as a distinguishing value that we can provide in the face of the increasing use of technology. So we know lawyers are leaders, to Herb's point. Lawyers are counselors. Lawyers are trusted advisors. Lawyers are problem solvers. And so the skills necessary to be these roles, to be effective in these roles, relates to the emotional intelligence, right, of the individual. So we go back to the T-shaped lawyer, which again, gained traction, is amazing at helping the profession understand that it's not sufficient to just focus on these legal knowledge and skills, but where does this emotional intelligence fit in? So in 2018, along with a couple other colleagues, we just took the T-shaped lawyer and added a third side. I mean, this is not magic. We put the T shape on its side, the stem of the T becomes the base of the triangle, the top of the T becomes the right side, and we add this third side, the people, so that the model of, appropriately recognizes the increasing role that emotional intelligence is playing, given the increasing role of technology. So that's where the Delta model sort of came about, to help our profession start navigating the changes we were experiencing pre-COVID. Now, the model is based on established research. So there have been plenty of initiatives to help the profession understand, particularly the importance of the people side of the skills. So Herb mentioned his book, a great example. We have the McCrate report from the 90s that was in the legal education setting, telling law schools, listen, it's not enough just to teach them how to think like a lawyer. In 2007, the Carnegie report is published to tell law schools, you're not doing enough. Recommendation number 5 says you need to weave together disparate kinds of knowledge and skills. So more than how to think like a lawyer. Then these two professors, I think from Berkeley, do some research to identify that we're not even assessing the right skills to predict success in the practice. To accurately predict success, we need to be thinking about things like communication and conflict resolution and our ability to work with others. They identified 26 lawyering effectiveness factors that go into more accurately predicting success. Side note, these predictors also remove the unnecessary barriers to entry to the profession that our current assessment models do, for particularly Black applicants into our profession. So it also helps fix that issue. Then in I think it was 2015, 2016, I forgot to write it down, the Institute for the Advancement of the American Legal System publishes this report called The Foundations of Practice, where they survey, I think it was 40,000 practicing attorneys about the necessary skills that new attorneys need right out of law school. They identified 77 skills and characteristics that are needed, and the top of those skills were much more about interactions with others, communication, ability to manage work, and less about our legal knowledge, assuming that the individual is going to gain the legal knowledge that's necessary in their practice area once they start practicing. The working group that started developing or came up with this model did some original research as well. So we wanted to validate the model. We felt like, okay, we have research that backs it up, it informs the model, how we came up with it, but let's make sure that the field really feels like this does reflect the holistic set of skills that are needed. So through Thomson Reuters, we did some original research and surveyed mainly large law firm and corporate legal department users of legal services, and asked them to give us their feedback on the model and what specific competencies should be listed under each of the three sides. At the time, the labels we were using for the three sides were personal effectiveness, business and operations, and the law. So you'll see that in every category, more than half of the respondents agreed that these were top priorities for the field. And interestingly, since the Delta model really was an adaptation of the T-shaped model to help our field address, respond to the increasing use of technology, big law and corporate legal was like, that's not as important to us as the personal effectiveness and the law. So this sort of came yet another moment for me where I was like, well, let me go back and look at the model to make sure that we are able to reflect this slightly difference in opinion from the push with the T-shaped lawyer. So went back and looked at the model to see, can it visualize all of these different perspectives while still retaining the truth that these three areas are important to the success of a practicing attorney or a legal professional. So this, again, old labels. We just took the midpoint of this model and started moving it around to say, okay, maybe to reflect the differing roles across the profession that people take on, we can just shift the midpoint to reflect the differing degrees of depth and skill that someone needs. So the amount of surface area associated with any one side changes. The bigger it is, the more mastery of skill they need. The smaller it is, the less mastery of skill that they need. And so with doing that, we're able to create multiple versions of the same model without fundamentally changing it to reflect those differences. So let me just show you some, pull these up into separate slides so you can see them. So let's imagine we are trying to reflect the differing depths of degree and skill that someone who works in a large organization or a large law firm might need. So this is, again, that feedback from the survey respondents in the Thomson Reuters study. Well, we just shift the midpoint over a little bit. It's not that process skills aren't important. They were. They just aren't, the individuals don't need to have the depth of skill that someone in a different organization might need, because the large organization has the resources to provide it. There's an entire knowledge management group that's going to help you and it's going to look at the data and it can help you with that aspect of the practice. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't know it. You should. And it impacts your practice. You just are going to have a lot of resources to really enhance what you're doing. Compare that to someone who works in a small firm or agency who doesn't have those resources, right? They're doing all the case management. They're doing all of the business enhancement and marketing. They're doing all of the making sure things get filed on time. And do we have a system in place so that the process is smooth so we're not forgetting anything, right? So someone in a small firm might need to have an equal depth of mastery in all three of those areas. Then you've got folks who maybe aren't doing a lot of client interaction and aren't in charge of a lot of processes. They are research and writing. judicial clerks, appellate attorneys. We need to shift that midpoint all the way up to say, this skill is most important, right? It's almost that traditional understanding of law, but we retain some of that T-shaped lawyer of the understanding awareness of these two areas. So we're not discounting the other areas, but we are highlighting the specific depth somebody might need in one of the areas. And then we have the new roles that people are taking on, the roles that are coming to fruition because of the increased reliance on and use of technology. So for instance, legal operations. Somebody working in legal operations needs to have an understanding, awareness of the law. They're not practicing, so they don't need to have that mastery, but they need to know it. They're working within the legal profession. They're in charge of creating better, more efficient processes, right? Becoming innovative to make sure that we are doing things and delivering our legal service the best that we can, most efficiently and effectively. They're designing those processes by working with the users, which could be a client, could be the attorney. And so those people skills are going to be very important. So we just move that midpoint down a little bit to reflect those different types of roles that still rely on a holistic skill set, but to differing degrees. So here's this Delta model, a second moment where somebody provides us feedback. I go back and I look at it and I say, it still seems to meet the needs of our profession, to reflect these differing roles, these growing number of roles, these changing roles that our field is, that are coming to our field. Then COVID hits. If somebody was going to question the importance of technology beforehand, they cannot question it anymore, obviously. Our field struggles a little bit. I mean, I'm kind of proud to say that can I say that we figured it out? I can't go that far. But we all rose to an occasion. We all did something because we had to, right? In addition to the tech complications from COVID, we also faced the renewed attention to the racial injustices following the murder of George Floyd. And our field, like every profession, man, we had to look deep, those of us that are white, to say, what were we missing? What can we do? What changes need to happen in order to address this renewed attention to something that has existed for a long time? I go back to the Delta model. I'm like, well, can the Delta model really respond to this moment? I mean, yes, the technology, I felt very confident in that, and we got a lot of traction in the Delta model, I think, from that. But what about the racial injustice? How does the Delta model help inform our profession's need to grapple with the lack of diversity, inclusion, and equity? So the stock Delta model that we tend to show folks uses 77 characteristics from the ILES report, that Institute for the Advancement of the American Legal System. We went through their research and we identified the top skills in each of the three areas related to the Delta model. There's nothing special about these particular skills except that they came from, they're informed by research. But when we're faced with yet another moment of change and uncertainty, the question becomes, what skills should we be prioritizing right now? So the Delta model, let's design it together. Let's decide what those skills should be. So in the face of COVID, an entrepreneurial mindset and thinking about doing things a little bit differently, imperative. The ability to rethink process with courts and how we're doing stuff, crucial. Your knowledge of things like cybersecurity, even ADA accommodations given work at home situations, absolutely necessary. So we can design the model to reflect that. Okay, what about the racial injustice and the reckoning our fields of our profession and many other professions? Well, are we putting enough attention on cultural awareness? Are we placing enough attention on bias and self-awareness and self-reflection? To face this moment, we just need to identify the specific skills that will help us deal with it and map it onto the Delta model. Then we can still go and change, let me go back, change that midpoint to reflect the differing roles, but it's agile and customizable enough to really reflect any change I'm in moment of uncertainty. So that's the next slide. What do we have coming up? What are we going to face next? Right? What's it saying? The only thing that's certain is uncertainty. We're going to have change. We know this. We're in the midst of yet another change, given, you guys, the Delta variant. Horrible. And I'm only smiling and laughing because here I'm out there trying to promote the use of this Delta model, and it's unfortunate. But the model, I think, and again, I'm becoming increasingly convinced, will provide us the guide to face the next change, the next moment, or the continued moments of uncertainty. We will need to identify what specific competencies are most important to us. We will need to identify where we want to shift that midpoint to reflect whatever new role is comes about in the future as new roles are being created. So I think the Delta model can meet the challenge. I want to share with you before I open it up for Q&A and that feedback piece. Also, feel free to start writing in chat how you would like to use the Delta model, or any of those critiques or any questions that you have, but how people are currently using the Delta model. So these are examples of people, it's really been in reaction to COVID, who said, okay, the Delta model is providing us a guiding framework. We want to use it with this next initiative. So the Delta model is a model. It's this visualization. It's also this framework to guide us. And that's what I'm going to show you. And then I'm going to share with you some new tools that Kat Moon, a colleague of mine at Vanderbilt, and I are designing that we're super excited about. And that really, if we have more time or anybody wants to reach out to me afterwards, I would love to do any pilot workshops or get, again, your feedback, set up a session, get your feedback. So it's the model, it's a visual, it's got the three sides. As a framework, it gives us the ability to organize, assess, and plan initiatives. So CLE, right? Let me just give you some examples of what people have done for conferences. So the Minnesota Bar Association's Practice Law Conference last fall organized their conference tracks around the three sides of the Delta model. So they said, okay, if the Delta model provides us a framework to understand a holistic set of skills, let's put our conference sessions in these tracks so that people can choose whatever area maybe they need to gain the most knowledge in, or that they didn't have as much knowledge in. In the face of COVID-19, an organization was developed, created, called Passport to Practice, to sort of fill in the gaps of internships and summer associateships that had been canceled, to provide more programming. They designed the programming around the three sides of the Delta model. They actually pulled out technology as its own track and then had process. So the other thing it can do is help you assess whatever currently exists. So imagine you have a conference already planned. We can start putting the different conference sessions in these three buckets. And let me just, I just went on the web and looked for conferences that are existing. So this one is coming up, and this is the American Immigration Lawyers Association conference for 2021. I copy and pasted. You can see, not a surprise, the vast majority of programming, I actually stopped copying and pasting because I was running out of room, but the vast majority of programming is in practice. There is some programming in process, and there is some programming in people. Now, the Delta model places no judgment on whether or not this is enough, not enough. It just gives you the framework to say, is this reflective of what we want our conference to be focusing on, understanding that the Delta model represents a more holistic reflection of what's needed for the profession. So again, no judgment. I don't judge which career path somebody takes. I don't judge people's current skill level in any of these. It's really just a framework to help us sort of grow and, again, navigate. And to the extent the priority for the organization or the role somebody plays requires more training in people, then this tells me, I might need more programming here. Gives me a focus. Let me just give you another example. This is from a conference on labor and employment law. The focus was mostly on practice. I found one session on people and 0 sessions on process. Again, that could be fine, right? Like, We need to understand the law and get updates on the law. Especially you're a practicing lawyer, you need to know this. And what does it say if we don't have anything in process? Is that okay with us? So it's an assessment tool just to visualize some data about an initiative that we might be taking. So, we can also plan initiatives. So before anything is designed, we can say, where do we want to put our focus? How much focus in each of these? So we're working with a couple law schools, one that's doing a curriculum initiative, and they're going to try to figure out.
It's just Frankie Babenki saying.
They're going to figure out what they want to focus on, what they want their law school to be known as, and where maybe they have programming gaps, so they can fill those in, right? Last, because then I really do want to get to the Q&A and get your feedback, is this new tool that Kat Moon and I are creating that takes the model and says, let's design your model, your Delta. It is a tool for organizations and for individuals. I've already talked about sort of the organizational one, right? The organization can choose what skills, competencies they want to prioritize under each of the 3 areas. They can move the midpoint to reflect the differing roles in that organization, to come up with a few different models. But then we can start assessing and charting growth for success for individuals. So this is the new prototype. This is an organization that says they've chosen these 12 skills, 4 under each side of the model. And in each skill, the individual to succeed in that role needs to have full mastery of that skill in every single one of them, right? So that's the resulting graph. How does that help us? So this is maybe a different role. So this is, maybe they don't need to have full mastery of all of them. They need to have full mastery of these down here, but less mastery on that side. So that reflects to the shifting midpoint of the model. This is what I'm excited about, though. You have an ideal state, the outside circle, what the firm or organization says, this is what's needed. Then an individual can do an assessment, self-reflection, maybe we build a more scientific assessment if such a thing exists. And the individual understands, well, what's my current state? And with that current state, we then can identify, well, what are my gaps? For this individual, it's these 5 areas. So if I'm a law student, I'll choose classes based on filling those gaps. If I'm a 3rd-year associate and the next step of my career is this outside ideal state, well, then I'll take CLE in these areas, right? It provides a tool to be more intentional about our law school experience and our professional development. So here is the same career path, but 2 different individuals in the middle. So this individual, right, they would need to seek out courses, CLE in these areas, whereas the second individual would need to seek out courses in different areas. Another way to think about it is, here is 2 different paths, the outside circles, and with the same person in the middle. Let's say this is a law student and they're thinking that they're going to go into a career that requires mastery of all of these skills. Well, it tells me that this is the area that they need to focus on the most. It's their biggest skill gap. Maybe though, they find out about this other area, this other role, and they realize, my deficiency may not be that big of a deal. I need to focus on these skills. So same person, very different career path is going to lead to different classes, different CLEs that they're going to seek out. So we'll end with a Q&A, but I also am curious, how could you imagine using the Delta model in any one of its, as the framework or the tool? Do you think that it can help us meet these next moments of changes and uncertainty? I mean, you can even critique, does it help us in the changes and uncertainty that we're facing right now? And then of course, any questions that you have. And I'm going to turn it over to Dawn, who's going to be helping us for the last 10 minutes. Thanks, Dawn.
Well, I am super excited. My heart's beating like crazy, Allison, because this is the nerd part of me. This is the stuff I talk about all the time to anybody who will listen, as my 175 associates will tell you, we talk about this 4 times a year and they hate it. I just didn't know it was called the Delta model. So I was really close with Ali Gurkman. I've been working on that. Yeah. So anyhow,
Sorry.
in Canada, competencies has been a big thing for a really long time. So I wanted to ask a couple of questions before I let anybody else ask questions. And so that's the benefit of being the moderator, I think. I say to my associates all of the time that I think that the midline of your Delta model is going to change, not only, you know, like you said, based on the different requirements, but also on their year of call and their practice area. And so I had that question early on until you showed me your new measurement tool, and I can see how that would really be reflective of that. And so I think that measurement tool will help address that sort of situation. And I'm excited about that. I've also really struggled when I'm explaining this concept of titles for the competencies to the individual lawyers, because some of them don't like really the categories. And so the categories that you've used, you know, and the categories that I used, I mean, who knows, the people just, react differently to those different titles. And so I'm really sitting here thinking how I'm going to sort of incorporate the titles that you've used. But have you had some of that sort of harsh, you know, people immediately being worried about how you're categorizing them in those things?
Yeah, so I'll say a couple things about that. So one, Kat, Moon, and I shifted away from personal effectiveness skills, business and operations, and the law, not only because the 3 Ps has nice alliteration, that's all Kat, Moon. For those of you, I see some few people know Kat, all Kat, but because I did get some feedback from folks in nonprofit and public interest to say, it's not a business. Like and Kat will argue everything is, but I'm not, that doesn't speak to me. And it wasn't meant to, we wanted to be as inclusive as possible. So we just shifted it to the process. The piece about the competencies and which ones fit absolutely has been an ongoing conversation, which is why I think we moved away from saying these are the competencies, because I don't care to dictate which competencies they are. One, because I love what you just said. What practice area, what year, right? Where you're at in your career is really going to change where you need to go next. So the model had to be reflective of that. And as somebody who chose to pursue an alternative career in the legal profession as a dispute resolution professional, it's important to me that any career could be mapped on this. So I think there should be some norms, right? It should be grounded in something. This is not just willy-nilly, but I don't need to dictate how you prioritize what might be those norms.
Mm-hmm. Oh, fantastic. I am so excited. I'll definitely be reaching out to you after this. So Heather Gore-Lindell, she's from Toronto. She had a great question, and I invited her to ask you directly in this Q&A. So Heather, go ahead.
Thanks, Dawn. Hi, Allison. Nice to meet you. Thanks for this. I'm a big proponent of the Delta model, and I think a lot of us are. You've got quite a fan club here. But my question was, I know that, you know, there's a lot of talk around micro-credentials and digital badging and such that is happening. I don't think, you know, people can disagree that that's really kind of come to the legal community yet, but I could see something like that, you know, some type of digital credential kind of fitting nicely. Has there been any discussion around how you know, any kind of digital badge or digital competency would kind of fit nicely around this, so people can use that in their profile as they build out their plan and development?
Yeah, I love that idea. The short answer is no. The longer answer is we've talked to some companies about using some of their assessment tools to provide some more sort of stamps of approval of like, this assessment tool gives you a good gauge of what your people skills are. But the longer answer is that Kat and I are still teaching full time. And as much as this is our passion project, that area hasn't been fully developed. And I encourage anyone to take this model and do something with it. That's what we're most excited about. So I love that idea, Heather.
Okay, great.
I do too, Heather. I can tell you that I'm in-house now. I used to be a programmer for the province, but so the benefit of that is I get to decide what our Delta model looks like, and I get to work with our associates, and I force them to be able to do this sort of competency mapping and that sort of thing. But then to the next question, I also get to force them to look at where their gaps are and where that education design should be. And Monica asked, what do the numbers on the graph represent? And I don't know what the numbers on your graph represent, but I can tell you, Allison, that from our perspective, you know, we do have a feedback tool model that we fit as against the competencies so that we can take a look at the development of the associates and see where they go. So, I mean, I think that might necessarily be the next great step, is to have that kind of tool built right in. But do you want to comment on that for Monica?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, theoretically, they represent just the depth of skill. So the higher the number, the more skill you need in that specific area. And each organization would then identify what that means. So to get a 10 on your legal research skills, what does that look like? To get a 10 in your communication skills, what would that look like? We have designed, in our Design Your Delta pilot workshop, we are using some design approaches to help individuals reflect on their skill level. That is not at all scientific, but says, reflect on how many CLE you've taken in this area. How long have you practiced in that area? How long have you worked on situations that involve this skill? And then using some design principles to have them sort of map it out and graph it out leads them to at least a gauge between a 1 and a 10. So it's all relative. So I don't really care if it's a 10 or an 8, but if you're super highly qualified in this category, I want it reflect, and in this category, I want you to use the same number. So using much more of a design approach to it, again, because we haven't worked with anybody to do the more, I don't know what the word is, what Dawn's doing.
Well, and I also use it for support staff. So one of the things that I developed for our whole support staff when I look at the legal assistants and the paralegals and all of that thing is it's a trajectory for their growth, right? So if you're currently scoring a 2 or a 3, what do you need? What skills do you need to be able to get to the 10? And so coming up with the bars or the behavioral assessment of that.
Yes. Can I just say one other thing about that, which is, as a legal educator, that's the message I wish our students heard, right? Like, you can grow. I'm so sick and tired of my students being told that because of one class that this is their path. And it's like, no, we can be on a trajectory. And unfortunately, it might be true today in 2021 that your performance in this one class put you on this path. But I hate that. And if the Delta model can also help us move past that, I mean, like, dream come true. But that is a soapbox, and I'm going to be quiet and return it to you, Dawn.
One of the questions you asked us was, did we think that the Delta model can help deal with things like racial injustice and cultural awareness? And so my answer to you is yes. And so I spoke on a panel yesterday where I talked about getting credit, or our group, we had a panel that talked about getting credit for CLE and how that was impacted. And so I talked to a bunch of people in that session, and I said, I really challenge you to program even where you think you're not going to get credit, because I think it's a responsibility of ours to offer those kinds of programs, because they are for the whole lawyer well-being, I didn't know it was a triangle back then, but now that I do, Allison, it supports the whole triangle. And I think, so the answer to you, for me at least, is yes, the Delta model can help.
I love that, because if we could have that mapped onto the model so that, you get credit, but it is deemed valid and important because it is there.
Yes.
Right. Would be a start.
Yeah, absolutely. I've taken up all of the time in the Q&A. So does anybody else have any other questions?
It's fun to get excited about this stuff.
I'm geeking out for sure. So I just wanted to thank you for your time and your expertise, Allison. I was super excited when this session was suggested, and I really appreciated it, enjoyed it. I will reach out to you, and I encourage others to reach out and chat about this as well. And I wanted to thank everybody for attending this session. Some closing things for everybody to know that this conference evaluation is going to be sent out. So please respond to the evaluation when you do that. Allison has sent us the PowerPoint. It's currently being converted to a PDF, and it will be up on the conference platform for everybody. And just wanted to thank everybody for taking the time to participate in this. So
thank you so much, Dawn. Thank you, Aclea, and thank you all so much for being here.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Allison.